Well, I'm going to introduce Pastor Tim Turner. He is from Paducah, Kentucky. He pastors Christ Community Church in Paducah, Kentucky. I've known Tim since about 1985. And I've preached several revivals for Tim at his church. And Tim serves not only as senior pastor in Paducah, Kentucky, he also is a deputy sheriff, but he's the chaplain. But he has a badge. He's the real deal. He does a lot of the calls when someone passes or there's a tragic accident, if there's a death. He's a first responder. And so Pastor Tim, I love you. Thank you for taking time today to join us. You've experienced COVID-19 as a pastor, and I would like for you to speak to our pastors about COVID-19 today, please, and how it happened and et cetera, if you don't mind.
All right, let me start off by saying it's a real pleasure to be with your bishop today. And I apologize for my voice being weak. If you noticed, I drink a little bit. I'm trying to keep from coughing so much today. But Brother Cooper, Bishop Cooper and I go back a long ways. I'll let him tell you about the night we almost got put in jail. I probably shouldn't have brought that up, but that was a very innocent act. And I'm trying to smile today. I've been through a lot lately. But I wanted to tell you, Pennsylvania Church of God, it's good to be with all of you men and women and all you pastors. Ashley, good to be with you. And so I'm just really thrilled today to be able to talk to you. So I'll be brief. Brother Cooper wanted me to give you a little bit of a heads up on what it's like to go through the actual COVID-19 virus. 2 weeks ago yesterday, I thought I had a sinus infection. So I called my doctor, general practitioner, and she called me in some medicines, did a video conference with me. She told me, you need to go get tested because of my symptoms. I did, and about 30 hours later, it came back that I was COVID-19 positive. I had gotten, that was on a Tuesday. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago yesterday. That night, I started experiencing a very high fever. And of course, goes along with that, a lot of chills and body aches and things. So I tested positive. I was quarantined and went through about 7 days of that with, I had all the symptoms. The weirdest thing I experienced, not the most painful, but the weirdest, I lost all of my smell and all of my taste. Couldn't taste anything. I could feel the consistency of the food. I could tell I was eating it, but I couldn't taste anything. Couldn't smell it. So I went through all that for about 7 days. Last Thursday morning, I ended up on the floor in our living room here, could not breathe. This virus attacks your respiratory system. So my wife called the hospital. They called, I have some nurse friends. We called. Everybody was screaming, immediately get him to the hospital. I got there, found out that on top of the COVID virus, which attacks your respiratory system, I had pneumonia in both lungs. So she said, no wonder you couldn't breathe, and that's one of the things it does. So when I got to the hospital, they immediately started me on antibiotics, IVs, 10 or 12 leads in and out of me, watching me, monitoring me. So I sit there in the hospital. I just need to back up a little bit and tell you, Brother Cooper wanted me to tell you, we did like you did. Our churches, our government shut us down. Our governor told us we couldn't meet. So we did video live, Facebook live stream. We started with a piano, a bass, a drummer, 2 worship members, man and wife, husband and wife, who are our leaders. And let me tell you this, I've been with them 21 years. They were there when I came to this church 21 years ago. And a cameraman, so there were 7 of us. Both of those, husband and wife team, are nurses. They both work in and out of hospitals. He works in a nursing home. So what we did not know, he was COVID positive, but he was a carrier. He did not have any symptoms. And we didn't know that. He didn't know that. He was never sick. He never had the first symptom. And he brought it in to us. So that's when his wife was sick the weekend before me. but she didn't know what she had. And she was a nurse. She's a registered nurse. Both of them are registered nurses for 30 years. So I started having the symptoms and I went. And they, while I would, just before they admitted me, they admitted her, his wife. And, it was, and I'm trying to be brief here. I can't, I'll have to condense all this, but um, she became very severely ill. Today, she's been in the hospital almost 2 weeks. He was released today, but she is on a ventilator. She's been on about 7 days. She has 10% chance to live. Um, there were 7 of us in that room doing our worship, live stream worship. All seven. Cameramen stood back about 15, 20 feet. All of us developed the COVID virus. Then we all took it home. My wife has it. My mother is 81 years old and was visiting with me. She's still in the hospital, hopefully coming home tomorrow. It's just been, this thing spreads like wildfire. I can tell you, it is something I would have bet $1 million I'd have never gotten it, but we did, and it spread through us. I want to tell you a couple of notes here. Our worship leader, for some of you that think I don't have any symptoms, I want you to be careful. Our worship leader, who is a 30-year nurse, worked in a nursing home that was hard hit in our area. Over 70 COVID cases in that nursing home, 9 people dead in that nursing home. But he was the carrier. He didn't know he was sick. He didn't have any diseases or symptoms. I'm sorry, he didn't have any symptoms. So he brought it into us. We have 12 people now who have been diagnosed with the COVID-19 from where the 7 of us took it home. Last Thursday morning, when I couldn't breathe, and when I tell you the COVID thing attacks your lungs, and then I developed pneumonia on top, when I couldn't breathe, I don't, us guys, we want to be Chuck Norris, we don't ever want to get sick or go to the hospital. And I was determined I wasn't going. I was ready to go when I couldn't breathe. If you've ever been suffocated, you know what I'm talking about. So thank God I went. Our worship leader's wife waited too late. 10% chance of living. They have just recently, this morning, put her on fentanyl. They took her off morphine and put her on fentanyl, which is a very bad sign. I've stood along beside of her for 21 years. I want to tell you this, and I'm going to wrap this up. This thing has been far more emotionally hard on me as a pastor than it has physically, even though I didn't know if I was going to make it for a few hours. When I found out that one of our drummer owns a car lot, a car dealership, he called and told me, this before I went in the hospital when I wasn't quite as bad, he told me, I don't know if my business can survive. The worship team was sick. She was already in the hospital. He was in and out of the hospital. Our bass player lost his job because he was sick, but he's the only breadwinner, but all his wife and 3 kids got sick. So he had to stay home and help them even before he was diagnosed. We didn't know what he had it. This thing has really been hard on us. And I want to tell you as pastors, when we go back, I know there'll be soft openings. Our governor has told us in June we can go back in with restrictions. Our church will be one of the most safe churches because of what we've gone through. I wanted to tell you this. I know I wasn't responsible directly. Indirectly, we always are. But having lost our worship leader, the male, will never be back in our pulpit again. He had an emotional and a psychological breakdown. He'll never be back in our pulpit again. He gave the virus to one of the officers that I work with. Out of our 70 officers, there are only 2 that have the virus. I'm one of them. Our worship leader gave it to the other one over an incident. It's been emotionally the hardest thing I've ever gone through in my 30 plus years of pastoring. I just want to tell you, please be careful, whatever you do. I know God can do anything. We all know that. but he could have kept it away from our church. He could have kept it away from every Pentecostal church in America, and that doesn't always happen. So when you go back, please be careful, because the emotional stress of it all will be probably harder on you as a pastor than the physical things that you go through. Love you guys. Ladies, good to be with you today. Bishop Cooper, love you, my brother. I'm just glad to be anywhere today. It's good to be with you all.
Well, thank you.
Bishop Cooper, can I say one
Yes.
more thing?
Yes.
Can I say one more thing, Bishop?
Yes.
I sound like a really negative person, and I don't mean to be. Brother Cooper will tell you I've always been a lot of humor, a lot of optimism in my life. So I want to leave you with this note. Our church has excelled through this time. Our giving is up 40%, up 40%. We have never had, we're breaking records, and it's crazy. We've had people to walk up and give us thousands, tens of thousands of dollars just because they wanted to bless our church. We had a 15-year-old or 17-year-old girl saved yesterday because of this virus. We have 5 new families who are chomping at the bit to come to our church. I'm not saying that to put a feather in our cap. I sure wouldn't wish this on anybody. I want to tell you that God is in control, and you're going to make it. And you're going to be, and this is what I tell our church, we're going to be bigger, stronger. We're going to be bigger and stronger and better for it when we come through this. You be encouraged today. I just want to encourage you. God's going to bless your, I believe that God has prepared our churches, and he's going to give us a revival like we have not seen through this ordeal. God bless you. I'm finished.
Amen. Well, most of you can see on Tim's back screen, that's not a prop. He is one of the greatest musicians I know. He plays lead guitar really well, played with some of the greatest songwriters and worship bands and teams that I know in the land. He's a great preacher, a great pastor, and he's my friend and has been for many years. I want to open this up. First and foremost, Tim, I want to say thank you because I know there will be a lot of folks who would be reluctant to share their experience. But I know there's probably some folks on my call today, I hear it in their voice. I see it on their Facebook post and just different things that they're really ready. And I understand that. We want to get back to church. We want to do the things that we want to do. But I wanted them to hear the heart of a pastor who's experienced it, the effects that it's going to have on your church. You run, I think you told me your last service, you had 140, you average around 140. You're probably going to go to well over 200 when this is all said and done. But is there any advice as far as caution that you would say to them? Because I know you were only doing like 9 folks or 7 folks, and you all got it.
We were doing 7. We had a partial band, 2 worship leaders, myself, and the cameraman. Brother, I tell you, this thing is wicked, as one person described it to me. You can't see it. It has no respect of people. There's no way to know. I think the thing that I would like to leave with you pastors is, if you go back too soon, if you become careless, can you live with the results? That's the one thing I think you need to ask yourself, because I have lost 2 worship leaders. I can't go into the detail of it, but the man that leads our worship, he will never be back. He will never be back in my pulpit again. He had a meltdown. He had a breakdown. He did some things that I can't tell you. Some of them are legal. He will never be back again. 21 years stood by my side. My wife thinks that because he watched 9 people die and he thinks he gave it to his wife and to our church, he couldn't handle that. He's a registered nurse. The guy has degrees beyond what you can imagine, and he lost his mind over this. His wife is laying in the hospital, 10% chance of living. This thing has affected me far greater emotionally than it could ever affect me physically, even when I didn't know if I was going to breathe again. I just want to tell you, if you think about going back, go back carefully. You can't see it. You can't detect it. There will be people, or could be people in your church who are carriers and they have no symptoms. That's what happened in our church. A carrier won't exhibit symptoms. So you can't say if somebody's coughing or somebody has fever or if somebody's chilling or whatever. You can't say they might be, have the virus. They might be COVID positive. You may never know. I just encourage you, take great measures. I think we're going to do several different things. We have some nurses in our church. I think we're going to check for fever when they come in. I think we're going to, we're obviously going to ask them not to do this. I know I'm going to sound extreme because of what I've been through and what we're going through now. The two worship leaders for 21 years in my church will probably, they say it scarred her lungs, her larynx, her vocal cords. They say she'll never lead worship again. Now, I know God can do anything, but I want to tell you, I would be very careful. Can you live with things like that if you go back too soon? And you might say, well, I'm just doing what I think God wants me to. But as a pastor, you're pastoring because you love people. You have a call of God on your life and you love people. If ask yourself right now, if your top 2 or 3 people, maybe one of them died, could you live with that? And I think that's what we're going to do. That's going to be one of the conditions that we go back with is, can we live with what we have already and what we can stop? We couldn't stop it the first time, but we can stop it this time, hopefully.
Wow. Tim has agreed to answer questions if you have any questions or comments. Is there any questions or comments? You see any hands, Ashley?
Looks like Bishop Spellman. Give me one moment here.
You'll unmute Brother Spellman. Dr. Spellman.
Thank you, Bishop. Bishop Cooper. Brother Turner, I'm glad that you came through and be praying for your church. Pastor, can you tell us, how did you get through this? Are you cured now? And the other members of your church, have you've been through it? Does that mean that you are cured now? And what did they do to get you clean?
There is no treatment for the COVID virus yet. But what they treated me for, they pumped me for 2 days, 48 hours, they pumped me full of antibiotics for the pneumonia that I got on top of the COVID virus. To answer your question, you asked me 2 or 3 different questions. We have 3 people in our church, in our band, and their wives who are cleared now. They've gone through their 14 days today. 3 of them are cleared today. I was a little longer because I was hospitalized, but they are clear. I'm not yet. I am working my way through it. You asked me how I got through it. Bishop Cooper made a comment. I have played music. I didn't want this background. It's the quietest room in my house because it's my music room. It's soundproof, or not proof, but it's sound. It's good sound. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you is how I got through it. On Saturday, after I got out of the hospital feeling really weak, one of the symptoms of this is extreme fatigue. And I still have very shortness of breath now. I don't think I could preach a 20-minute message if I wanted to, but after I got out, my mother, the day after I got out, my mother and my wife both had to go to the ER. I had to drive them. I was sitting in the hospital. You can't go in the hospitals here. I guess it's that way in Pennsylvania, but you can't go in the hospital. So I had to let my mother out, and at the door, they came and got her. And then I sat in the parking lot for hours. While I was sitting in the parking lot of the hospital alone in my car, you can imagine I've had a lot of time to be in quarantine, to pray, to meditate. I had not meditated as good on the Lord as I should have. I pray a lot, but I need to shut up and listen to him more. I did a lot of that through all this. I was sitting in my car at the hospital. It had started to rain. I have a friend named Gerald Crabb with the Crabb family. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of them, but Gerald Crabb was doing a Facebook Live post on songs he had wrote. And I was watching that sitting in my car. And he said, he saw my name come up and he said, "It's good to see Tim." And I asked him, he said, at the end, he said, "Is there a song you want to hear?" And he wrote a song called, I don't know if any of you have ever heard this, "You Chose to Be My Friend." It wasn't one of their hits, but it was a beautiful song about the Lord chose to be a friend to me and to you. And I asked him to sing it, and he did. And I sat there in my car and I wept like a baby, sick, waiting on my mom, not knowing if she was going to be okay or not. My wife at home with the virus. And the Lord spoke to me through this. There are several things, and I'll just be brief on this one. He never left me. He never forsook me. He chose to be with me through this. Somebody asked me if I was mad, upset, because I got this and our church got it. I said, I've never been angry about it. Matter of fact, I was thankful that I got it instead of my children and my grandchildren. I was never angry about it. So I've never blamed God. I've never thought anything like that. The only thing I could think was, thank God he chose to be my friend through all of this. And he did. Stay with me, kept his helmet. Brother, scripture I quoted, I just thought, meditated, prayed, talked to the Lord, and that's what got me through it.
Thank you.
Is there any more questions? If you have a question, just keep your hand up, and Ashley has to scroll through, and I'll try to help her too if I can. Josh is still here with us. Yeah, I see a hand. That's Brother Brookins.
The legal aspect, once a member can testify that they got this by being in church, is there any legal fallout concerning that?
You talking to me, Brother
Yes.
Cooper?
Yeah.
I don't know how Pennsylvania is, not in Kentucky, because there are two things that the doctors told me. I was in a COVID unit. I had a COVID doctor. That's all he does. He's a specialist. It was quite an ordeal. They have to come in completely covered. They take everything off. I'll save all that, but I did talk to the doctors a lot, and they cannot. First of all, they can never trace it to where you actually originated with the virus. So there's no grounds for a lawsuit or anything like that. And if you're in Walmart or Lowe's or anywhere else that are still open, you could have gotten it there. So in Kentucky, I know there are no legal ramifications to this. It's kind of, you risk when you go, you're risking when you go to Walmart or Lowe's. So it's kind of on you, is my understanding here.
Thank you.
Any more questions? That's a very good question. Yes, there's a hand, Brother Johnny Bayosh.
Yeah, question for Pastor Turner. Our church, we actually did our live stream service a week before Pennsylvania had mandated the stay-at-home order. And I know throughout this whole thing, there's kind of been a divide in where people stand with the COVID-19 and how serious to take it. And I know, like, when we decided to do a live stream and not have physical service, members of our congregation were kind of, I wouldn't say split down the middle, but there were several people that kind of vocalized things on Facebook. They weren't happy about it. How do you, hearing you say that you might remain extra cautious and maybe not even open up right away, even if the government says you can, which I agree with you, and I think that that's really smart. But how do you think that will affect the people that come to your church? Do you think people will, I guess just in general, if other people decide to do what you're suggesting, think people will find another church that is opening so they can go enjoy physical service? Do you think people will understand and fall in line with that? Or how do you think that'll affect congregation?
Brother John, I think that's an excellent question that I've ran over a million times in my head, because one of the things that none of us pastors want to do is lose our people. And to keep them right now, keep them connected is a very difficult thing. I've always lived by the principle, if somebody else can get them, I never had them. So I'm just relying on that. And another thing is too, our church people are so happy that we're doing better. They're not going anywhere. They are like us. They're miserable. All of you pastors are miserable. We are miserable not being with our people. But I think that's going to make the reconnection even that much sweeter. I'm not delaying, Brother John, I'm not delaying our church on purpose. I'm not delaying it for any other reason. I'm miserable not seeing them myself. But I cannot. I told my wife, you all have to forgive me for being emotional today because I have two people I love. One is dying. I told my wife, I said, I miss them so bad, but I can't go through this again. I can't feel like I've been responsible or careless or neglectful and go through this one more time. I stood beside this man and woman for 21 years. I can't do this again. So my bottom line is this. I'm doing Facebook. I'm going to do a message tonight. And I'm going to do a message tonight that on Facebook Live from my house right here, just to keep them connected. And I'm going to encourage them. But if they, if somebody leaves our church, so be it. I don't think anybody will. Matter of fact, I think we're going to come back bigger and stronger and better. And you're going to hear me say that every time you talk to me.
Absolutely.
I believe that. Hey, Brother John, I will tell you this. After we hang up, if you want to friend me on Facebook, let them go to my Facebook page and read the post where our worship leader may not make it. And one of them had a emotional meltdown, and where I was in the hospital, my mother still is, and our worship team all got sick. Maybe that will encourage them to understand you cannot play with this thing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? I'll have to help Ashley and Josh as we scroll through. If you have a question or comment, if you'll just raise your hand.
Pastor Durston.
Okay. Go ahead, Pastor Durston.
I have a question for Brother Turner. Is do you, first of all, your friend that his wife is in the hospital, what signs and symptoms, him being, I guess you would call asymptomatic, did he show? Because I'm very concerned that even if we do come into this in a very soft way, how is it then that we can tell who has, who doesn't have, even without the test?
Pastor Bill, he was what is called a carrier. He was asymptomatic, which means he had no symptoms. We had no way of knowing it. He didn't exhibit the first symptom. But what happened, he was coming home and living with his wife, and he gave it to her. She started to develop symptoms. He never did. Even when they hospitalized him because he tested positive, but he never showed any symptoms. He did start coughing a little bit. Most of his hospitalization was because he had extenuating circumstances. But when somebody is COVID-19 positive and they're a carrier, my understanding is they don't have any visible symptoms.
Is there any recommendations that you could give that how we could look for this? I mean, to be more vigilant at the front door. Was there anything that we can train our ushers that they can look for?
In retrospect, I wish we had done more, but I don't know of anything you can do. I mean, there was no fever from him. There was no coughing. There was nothing. You know, there's about 9 symptoms of the COVID virus. He had none of them, not the first one we ever saw. Now, his
Okay.
wife exhibited all of them when she got it.
Yes.
He never did. So when a person is a carrier, and that's why I tell you, and I don't want you to fear. I don't think any pastor ought to live in fear. I won't go back in fear, even after what we're going through. But you can't stop it. There's no way to stop it. You can't see. You can't stop it when what you cannot see or feel, or you can't stop. So that's just something I think that we just have to pray and ask God to help us. Why has this happened to our church? I've been asked that 1,000 times. I have no idea. We were probably the hardest hit church in our state, and I have no idea.
Yes. Well, we'll continue to pray for you. Listening to your story made me relive here not too long ago. My son contracted this, and he's a police officer in the state of Indiana. He's a canine officer. And he had taken somebody to the hospital. Long story short, they found out that he had this virus. So he didn't even go home that night. He began isolation. Long story short, he came down with it. And it wasn't too long after that, I remember his wife called and told me that they had taken him to the hospital, to the emergency room, and they took the phone to him. And one of the last things I heard my son say to me, and he was so weak that not only did they put him on a respirator, he lost his organs, began to shut down. And when I saw him in his face, you could see that he lost 15, maybe 20 pounds just in a short time. And the only thing he was able to muster up to tell me was, "Dad, pray for me."
Yeah.
So I relate.
Yeah.
What you're going through as a father and as a pastor.
Pastors, let me tell you one thing about this is it's far more emotionally draining than it is physically, even though when you can't breathe, you do get scared. But my kids laying in the hospital, we can't have any visitors here, and I guess it's that way in Pennsylvania. You can't. A hospital looks like a ghost town. And when they rolled me to my room, a security guard had to go before me and stop every hallway. And it's crazy times. But as Brother Bill said, you have to do Skype or video chatting to even see your kids. They worry about you. This thing is emotionally, mentally draining. Can I tell you guys something I've never told anybody here? I told my wife, Pastor Cooper, Bishop Cooper, this is something you all can pray for me about. I don't have the heart to go back right now. I know I will because I'm called to do this. But boy, it has drained me. And it's been the hardest thing I've ever been through in my ministry. So just be careful. That's all I can tell you. I know when it's time to go back, God will help me. But right now, I'm just emotionally drained from all this.
Amen. Well, and I know you're a first responder, and the people in your church that contracted it, we're first responders on the front line, and we need to pray for our first responders. And I have for years, I always have. We have a lot of people on here who are, their children are state patrols. I see the Mitchums. I know Brother Durston's family in law enforcement. I know there's a lot more. I'm just looking at one page right now. But Pastor Tim, I want to ask this question because there is so many of us right now. We're doing the drive-in service. We're doing the Facebook Live with about 7 to 9 people in our services. Did you guys really try to practice the social distancing thing while you were doing that? Talk to me about that and what that looked like. And I know in retrospect, there may have been things you've done different, but was there anything that you can think of that could maybe help these? Because, you've got about 82, there's actually more than that on here. we got 82 screens up. There's probably closer to 90 pastors on this call. What would you advise if you would?
Well, I think, Bishop, we made some mistakes. We're like you. We thought it would never happen to us. We thought this will never happen to us. And while we weren't shaking hands and hugging necks, we would elbow bump. Good to see you. When a brother or a sister walks in the church, it's hard not to do that. I think you would all kind of relate to that. Our drummer is caged in, but the bass player sits 5 feet from him. Our piano player, we didn't have our full band. Our piano player sat quite a ways away. The worship team stood close to me when I came up, especially at the altar time that we did a song, and I gave an altar invitation several times. We probably were too close. We tried to stay 6 feet apart, but there were times we probably were 3 or 4 feet apart. And we did, as I said, bump shoulders or bump elbows. You know, I want to tell you, we won't do that anymore, not until this thing is cleared up. So I want to tell you guys that think it'll never happen to you, and churches that think it will never happen to them, as hard, as much as you love and as much as you want to shake somebody's hand and hug somebody's neck, forego that for a while and just wave at them and keep your distance, because it's an emotional trip you do not want to take, I assure you.
Is there any more questions? Before we go, we are going to have a word of prayer for you, Pastor Tim, and I've been praying for you daily. And actually, I had sent out a prayer request for you to our pastors and ministers in the state. It was on Facebook, so it was public knowledge.
Yes.
And so that's why I did that, sent the prayer request out. But I want to see if there's any more questions or comments